The acrid tang of ozone bit at the back of my throat, a familiar burn that had become a strange comfort. It was a physical sensation, sharp and undeniable, capable of cutting through the hazy film of memory that perpetually clung to the edges of my vision. I leaned closer, the heavy visor a shield against the glare, and the arc flared, a violent sun blooming in the gloom. Sparks, like angry, molten insects, danced and hissed against the scarred concrete floor of the workshop with welding equipment, sparks in darkness. Each crackle was a small, fleeting victory against the silence that usually suffocated me. My hands, once accustomed to the precise glide of a stylus over a digital tablet, now gripped the welding torch with a practiced, desperate strength. The rhythmic grind of metal on metal, the high-pitched whine of the grinder, these were the sounds that filled my days now. They were loud, they were real. I was building something, though I wasn't entirely sure what. A sculpture, perhaps. A twisted lattice of steel and copper, a monument to the jagged edges of my own existence. Or maybe it was just busy work, a way to exhaust my body so my mind, for a few precious hours, might finally fall silent. The heat from the molten metal radiated through my thick gloves, a searing warmth that was almost welcome. It felt honest. My family. The word felt like sandpaper on my tongue, raw and painful. I designed that house myself, poured my heart into every beam, every window, every intricate detail that was meant to cradle them in comfort. It had been my masterpiece. It had become their tomb. I saw the flames still sometimes when I closed my eyes, a hungry orange maw devouring everything I loved. The smoke, thick and black, choking out not just air but hope. And the guilt. Every breath I took felt stolen, every beat of my heart a betrayal. I broke the arc, pulling the torch away. The bright afterimage lingered, a ghost in my vision. Sweat beaded on my forehead, stinging my eyes. I lifted the visor, and the workshop's dim, cavernous expanse returned. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak sunlight filtering through a high, grimy window. The air hung heavy with the smell of scorched metal and stale air, a scent that had become my personal perfume. My existence had narrowed to this. The rhythmic clang of my work, the solitary meals, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, listening to the echoes of laughter that would never sound again. Colleagues, friends, they had tried. They had called, sent messages, even visited. But what could they say? What comfort could they offer when the architect of my own sorrow was myself? I was determined, but it was a grim, punishing determination. A will to simply endure. A sharp rapping at the workshop's rusted metal door startled me. I rarely had visitors. My few remaining contacts knew I preferred to be left alone. I hesitated, my hand still resting on the cool metal of the workbench. The rapping came again, louder this time, insistent. It wasn't the tentative knock of a concerned acquaintance. This was official. This was someone who expected an answer. I peeled off my gloves, my movements slow, almost reluctant. He held a slim, leather briefcase and regarded me with an expression that was polite but unyielding. His eyes, behind wire-rimmed spectacles, were sharp, assessing. "Raj?" he asked, his voice smooth, professional. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "That's me. I am the representative for the late Mr. Ashish Sharma," he stated, producing a card that bore the crest of a well-known legal firm. "I believe you are his only surviving direct relative." Ashish Sharma. The name was a phantom, a distant echo from a past I had tried to bury. My great-uncle, a man I had met only a handful of times in my childhood, a reclusive figure who had lived out his days in a forgotten corner of the country. I had barely known he was still alive. The representative stepped inside, the workshop's gloom swallowing him whole. He didn't seem to mind the dust or the smell. He produced a thick envelope from his briefcase, its heavy paper stock and wax seal hinting at its importance. "It is with regret that I inform you of his passing." The representative continued, his tone devoid of real emotion. "And as per his last will and testament, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate." My mind reeled. An estate? Ashish Sharma had been a man of modest means, or so I'd always believed. My family rarely spoke of him, and when they did, it was always with a strange, hushed reverence, mixed with a palpable sense of unease. I took the envelope, the paper cool beneath my calloused fingers. My name, Raj, was written in elegant, unfamiliar script. Inside, among official-looking documents and legal jargon, was a single, folded letter. It was old, the paper yellowed, the ink faded. "My dearest Raj," it began, in a shaky, spidery hand that was unmistakably my great-uncle's. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the burden now falls to you. The house, it is yours. My only request is that you understand its true nature. It is not merely a collection of bricks and mortar. It is a vessel, a keeper of sorrows." My breath hitched. A vessel, a keeper of sorrows. What did that even mean? I scanned the accompanying legal documents, my eyes catching on a property description. A sprawling, dilapidated ancestral home, remote and isolated, tucked away in the countryside. The images that flashed through my mind were of crumbling stone and overgrown gardens, a place time had forgotten. Then, buried deep within the convoluted legal prose, a specific clause caught my eye. It wasn't about taxes or maintenance. It was a condition, a stipulation that made the hair on my arm stand on end. The beneficiary must reside in the property for a minimum of 1 calendar year, unassisted, without significant structural alteration, and without attempting to remove or destroy any original fixtures or contents. Unassisted, without structural alteration. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a mandate, a prison sentence. Why such specific, strange conditions for a crumbling old house? What kind of legacy was this, wrapped in such an unsettling demand? And what exactly was my great-uncle trying to keep contained within its walls? The gravel crunched under the rental van's tires, a sound far too loud in the oppressive stillness. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in, thick and heavy as the summer air. My great-uncle's will, with its bizarre, unyielding conditions, unassisted without structural alteration, echoed in my mind. It wasn't just an inheritance, it felt like a sentence, a challenge laid out by a man I barely knew, a man who had chosen this crumbling edifice as my penance or my salvation. What was he trying to keep contained, or perhaps keep me from? The house was larger than the photos suggested, more severe. Windows like vacant eyes stared out from beneath heavy brows of eaves. A faint, earthy scent, like damp soil and forgotten things, wafted from the porch. This was it, my fresh start, or the end of one. Moving my meager belongings into the house felt less like settling in and more like disturbing a slumber. Each box I carried over the threshold seemed to stir the dust, sending motes dancing in the shafts of weak sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. The floorboards groaned under my weight, a chorus of complaints from the house itself. I set up a temporary sleeping arrangement in what I assumed was once the master bedroom, pulling a thin mattress onto the floor. The room was vast, the ceiling soaring far above, making me feel small and exposed. I pulled on a sweater, then another, shivering slightly even as sweat beaded on my forehead from the exertion of unpacking. This house, it seemed, had its own climate. The first sound I heard was a scraping, a slow, deliberate drag as if something heavy was being pulled across an uncarpeted floor. It came from downstairs, somewhere deep within the house. I froze, a box of old books slipping from my grasp with a thud. My breath hitched. I waited, straining my ears, but nothing. It must have been the house settling. I told myself, a loose floorboard, an old pipe groaning. This place was ancient, after all. I forced myself to continue unpacking, trying to drown out the unease with the mundane task. The scraping sound returned, fainter this time, but unmistakably there. It was closer, it seemed, and higher pitched, like metal on stone. My gaze darted towards the door, then to the unlit hallway beyond. My skin prickled. This was no settling house. This was something else. Slowly, carefully, I moved towards the bedroom door, my steps tentative. The sound seemed to emanate from the back of the house, perhaps near the old kitchen or the utility room. My hand trembled as I pushed open the door, peering into the gloom of the hallway. No light switch worked out here, and the afternoon sun barely penetrated. I followed the sound, my nerves fraying with every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The scraping grew louder, more distinct, leading me deeper into the house, past rooms cloaked in dust sheets, past hallways that twisted unexpectedly. It was a rhythmic sound now, a methodical shhhhk, like someone sharpening a blade or grinding something down. My mouth went dry. My hands clenched into fists. The sound led me to a heavy wooden door, almost indistinguishable from the wall in the dim light. I pushed the door open, the old hinges groaning in protest. The air was thick with the tang of ozone and old metal, a powerful acrid scent that burned my nostrils. Sparks, tiny and fleeting, danced in the gloom, reflecting off the polished surfaces of tools hanging from pegboards. A workbench, scarred and blackened, dominated the center of the room, littered with various implements, files, hammers, a vise. The rhythmic shhhk continued, echoing off the concrete walls. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the source, the sparks, the sound. There was no one here. The welding equipment sat idle, its cables coiled neatly. The grinder was off. The sparks, too, seemed to flicker from that same unseen spot, tiny pinpricks of light against the impenetrable black. I took a step forward, then another, my heart racing. The air in my lungs felt like ice. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom, to find the source of the impossible sound, the impossible light, but there was nothing. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The sparks vanished. The sound ceased. I stood there, frozen, staring into the empty corner, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? The sound was so real, the sparks so vivid. What kind of trick of light and sound was this? What was truly happening in this house? My rental van felt suddenly flimsy, a toy against the stone mass. I pushed open the driver's side door, the groan of the hinges echoing. The air hit me, cool and damp despite the summer evening, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic and old like rust and forgotten blood. My hand, clammy, gripped the worn leather of my duffel bag strap, one foot out then the other. Each step on the gravel sent a shiver up my spine. This wasn't a fresh start. It felt like walking into a tomb. The front door, heavy oak, bore a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a grimacing lion. I didn't use it. The key, a heavy iron relic from the solicitor, slid into the lock with a rusty complaint. A click loud as a gunshot in the stillness. I pushed. The door swung inward with a drawn-out shriek, revealing a cavern of gloom. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that penetrated the grimy windows, illuminated by the fading day. The air inside was still, thick with the smell of decay, old paper, and something subtly acrid like burnt sugar. My eyes struggled to adjust. I told myself it was just an old house, an abandoned old house. The damp air was merely a product of neglect, the smells the natural consequence of time. But the unease was a knot tightening in my gut. I found a light switch near the door. It clicked uselessly. Of course. The power would be off. It revealed more dust, more cobwebs, furniture draped in white sheets like ghostly figures. Everything was still, utterly still, as if holding its breath. My first task, I decided, was to find the main breaker. It had to be somewhere in the basement or a utility room. I remembered a vague mention from the solicitor about a workshop on the ground floor, perhaps connected to an old generator or the main electrical panel. I needed light, proper light, to begin to tackle this place. I moved through the house, my footsteps muffled by thick layers of dust and time. Each floorboard creaked under my weight, a chorus of complaints. I felt watched, a prickling sensation on my neck, but every time I spun around there was nothing but the vast, empty rooms. Just my imagination, I reasoned, the fatigue of the long drive playing tricks. I hugged myself, wishing I'd grabbed a warmer jacket from the van. At the end of the corridor, a heavy wooden door, different from the others, stood slightly ajar. A faint, metallic tang, sharper than the general mustiness, drifted from within. This had to be it, the workshop. I pushed the door open fully. It scraped against the floor, a grating sound that reverberated in the confined space. My phone's beam cut through it, revealing a chaotic jumble of tools, rusted machinery, and workbenches piled high with forgotten projects. The air here was thick with the scent of oil, metal, and something else, sharp and electric, like ozone after a storm. My flashlight played over a bulky, ancient welding machine, its cables snaking across the concrete floor like dormant serpents. A stack of metal sheets leaned against a far wall, glinting dully. I scanned the room for a breaker box, my eyes darting over the clutter. Then it happened. A blinding flash erupted from the welding machine. The air cracked, a sharp, violent sizzle. Sparks, brilliant orange and white, showered across the room, illuminating it in a strobe-like frenzy. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, a choked gasp escaping my lips, my hand flying up to shield my eyes from the sudden, intense light. The machine roared, a deep guttural hum that vibrated through the floorboards and up my legs. More sparks flew, a furious, uncontrolled display. A shallow, elongated indentation, as if something heavy and irregular had recently rested there, its edges still faintly glowing with a residual heat that shimmered in the air. The dust around it was disturbed, pushed aside, not settled. It was fresh. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat, my lungs burned. The smell of ozone was overpowering now, stinging my nostrils. How? The house had been empty for years, decades. The solicitor had assured me. I tried to rationalize it. A faulty circuit, a surge of phantom power. But the sheer violence of the sudden activation, the fresh disturbance on the bench, it felt deliberate. It felt personal. I squeezed my eyes shut, then forced them open, trying to make sense of the chaotic light. The sparks were dancing, not randomly, but almost swirling, forming patterns that seemed to shift and coalesce just at the edge of my vision. The afterimage of the sparks burned into my retinas, leaving glowing trails. The metallic tang of ozone lingered, heavy and suffocating. My legs felt like jelly. I leaned against the door frame, gasping, trying to calm the frantic thrumming in my chest. Was I losing my mind? Had the isolation, the guilt, finally broken something inside me? I squeezed my eyes shut again, pressing the heels of my hands against them until colored lights swam behind my eyelids. But now it felt different. It felt watchful. The house had been empty, they said, but something had been in that workshop. Something had made those sparks fly, and it wasn't a faulty wire. It felt like a warning or an invitation. What exactly had I just witnessed? And what could possibly have left such a fresh mark in a place untouched for so long? The questions hung in the thick, metallic air, heavy and unanswered. The gravel crunched under the rental van's tires, a sound far too loud in the oppressive stillness. My chest felt tight, a familiar clenching that had become a constant companion since. Since everything. I needed to breathe. I needed to move. My architectural training, the very thing that had brought me so much pride and then so much grief, now screamed for a logical explanation. This house, this ancient, brooding structure would yield its secrets to my scrutiny. It had to. I stepped out, the evening air cool against my skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old like forgotten iron. My gaze swept over the facade, already dissecting, analyzing. The stone blocks were mismatched in places, a patchwork of repairs and additions over centuries. One window, high up on the third floor, seemed slightly off-kilter, its frame subtly distorted like a mouth perpetually agape. I made a mental note. My fingers traced the rough grain of a warped timber beam near the main entrance. It felt dry, almost brittle, despite the lingering humidity. No obvious signs of structural compromise, not from the outside, but the sheer age of the place spoke of hidden weaknesses. I circled the perimeter, my boots scuffing on the overgrown weeds. The back of the house was even more decrepit, a section of the roof sagging precariously, tiles missing like broken teeth. Here, the metallic smell was stronger, laced with something acrid, almost burnt. I found a back door, a heavy oak slab bound with rusted iron. It groaned like a dying beast as I pushed it open, revealing an interior swallowed by twilight. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of remaining light filtering through grimy windows, something faintly sweet and cloying. Raj, I whispered to myself, the sound swallowed immediately by the vast silence. Architect, rationalist. My hand, surprisingly steady, found the light switch, but nothing happened. Of course. The power was probably cut, or the wiring too old. I pulled out my phone, its flashlight beam a pathetic spear against the encroaching gloom. The beam cut through the air, illuminating a wide, central hallway. Cobwebs draped like forgotten shrouds from the ceiling. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each step a mournful protest. I moved from room to room on the ground floor, my flashlight darting into corners, along walls, across ceilings. The layout was erratic, a testament to generations of additions and modifications. Rooms flowed into each other awkwardly, some dead-ending unexpectedly. I noticed a consistent anomaly. Several walls, particularly on the western side of the house, seemed unusually thick. Tapping them with my knuckles, the sound was dull, solid. It wasn't the sound of plaster over lath or even drywall. My pulse quickened, a logical explanation, a hidden space, perhaps a forgotten storage area or an old servant's passage. This was the kind of structural secret I understood, the kind I could unravel. I needed tools. I remembered seeing a small outbuilding, a shed or a workshop, nestled behind a tangle of overgrown shrubs as I'd driven in. It had looked more substantial than a garden shed. My best bet for tools. Stepping back out into the rapidly deepening twilight, the air felt heavier, more watchful. I shivered despite the mild evening. The metallic, burnt smell was much stronger out here. It led me like a scent trail around the back of the house, past the sagging roofline, and into a dense thicket of thorny bushes. Pushing through them, my clothes snagging on unseen branches, I emerged into a small clearing. And there it was, a low-slung, windowless structure of corrugated iron, its surface mottled with rust. The door, a heavy sliding panel, was partially ajar, a sliver of intense, flickering orange light spilling from within. My breath hitched. The air here vibrated with the acrid scent of ozone and superheated metal. A rhythmic hiss-crack emanated from the gap, accompanied by flashes that briefly illuminated the surrounding trees in stark, unnatural relief. It was the sound of a welder. Someone was in there or something. My mind raced. I was alone here. The estate agent had assured me the property was uninhabited. Who would be welding in an abandoned workshop at dusk in a house that hadn't been touched in decades? The sparks were not residual. They were active. My hands felt clammy. I approached the opening cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the soft, damp earth. The light pulsed, strobing. The air shimmered with heat and the tang of burnt dust. I peered through the narrow gap. A single, bare bulb hung precariously from the ceiling, its light weak, but it wasn't the source of the intense orange flashes. Those came from a welding torch, its fierce blue-white flame momentarily obscured by a shield, then flaring into blinding orange as it bit into metal. I couldn't make out a figure. The rhythmic hiss-crack continued, relentless, methodical. What was being built or repaired? And why was I suddenly so certain that whatever was happening in that workshop was not meant for human eyes? Webs. Thick, gray shrouds hung like forgotten funeral drapery, swaying imperceptibly in the stale air I disturbed. My phone's light, feeble as it was, cut a path through the oppressive gloom, illuminating a wide, central hallway. Dust motes danced in its beam, a silent, swirling cosmos of decay. The silence was not empty. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from years of neglect and something far older. It pressed in, muffling even the sound of my own careful breaths. Each step I took on the warped floorboards sent a shudder through the house, a groan of ancient wood protesting my intrusion. The air, cold and damp, carried the faint, cloying scent of mildew and something else, something metallic like old blood or perhaps just rust. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as the smell of an abandoned structure, but the scent clung to the back of my throat, acrid and unsettling. I moved slowly, my gaze sweeping the periphery of the light. There were shrouded forms lining the hallway, ghosts under sheets, forgotten furniture, perhaps a grandfather clock, all waiting in silent judgment. My hand, still clutched around my phone, felt clammy. This was no ordinary house. I had designed houses, studied their bones, understood their weaknesses. This house felt alive in a way that defied all architectural logic. My guilt, a constant companion since the fire, flared with renewed intensity here. I pushed it down, as I always did, clamping a mental lid on the churning grief. I had come here for answers, not to drown in my past. This determination, brittle as it felt, was the only thing keeping me moving. The hallway opened into a larger chamber, a sort of sitting room, judging by the shape of the shrouded forms. One of the sheets had slipped, revealing the elegant curve of an antique rocking chair. My light lingered on it, and then on the floor beside it, something small and round. It was a porcelain doll's head, cracked across one eye, its painted smile frozen in a grotesque rictus. It lay there, abandoned, a poignant echo of lost innocence. Who had played with this? What tragedy had made them leave it behind? A faint, almost imperceptible scrape drifted from deeper within the house, drawing my attention away from the doll. My heart skipped. I told myself it was the house settling, the wind, anything but a conscious presence. The determination that had propelled me forward now felt more like a desperate compulsion. I had to know. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam dancing ahead, a frantic beacon. It led me down another narrow corridor, lined with doors, all closed, all equally menacing. The metallic scent grew stronger here, sharper, mingled with something else, ozone perhaps, or burnt metal. A faint, rhythmic clang began, soft at first, then growing louder like a blacksmith's hammer striking distant iron. My breath hitched. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't the house settling. The sound led me to a heavy, wooden door at the very end of the corridor. I pushed it open slowly, bracing myself. The hinges shrieked, a sound like a tortured animal, and then I was inside. The air was thick with the tang of old metal and a faint electrical ozone. Tools hung from pegboards, their silhouettes monstrous in the shifting light. A workbench, cluttered with half-finished projects and scattered components, dominated the center of the room. Flickering, brilliant blue-white sparks erupted from a corner, illuminating for a split second a hulking, silent form. It was a welding machine, its torch still attached, somehow active though no one was there. They were accompanied by a low, insistent hum, a vibration I felt in my teeth. My eyes, wide and disbelieving, scanned the area around the welding machine. The sparks intensified, briefly illuminating a stack of old journals on a dusty shelf nearby. They were open, brittle pages yellowed with age. My hand, trembling now, reached for the closest one. The light from my phone was swallowed by the sparks, making it hard to see, but I forced myself to focus. The handwriting was cramped, precise, but jagged with what looked like desperation. I held the book closer, shielding the page with my body from the overwhelming, unearthly sparks. It was a diary, detailing not just the daily life of a previous inhabitant, but a relentless descent into despair. Paragraph after paragraph, the words painted a picture of immense, crushing grief, loss after loss. A child, then a spouse, then a catastrophic financial ruin. The final entries were almost illegible, scrawled with a frantic hand. It feeds, it thrives. The sorrow, it's never enough. I brought it here, my fault. My fault. The words screamed in my head, echoing my own torment. This wasn't just a house. This was a cage, a trap. The entity, this presence, it didn't just exist here, it was nourished here. It consumed the very essence of human despair, gorging on the agony of those who had lived and suffered within these walls. And I, Raj, with my bottomless well of guilt and grief, was the perfect, unwitting sacrifice. The sparks from the welding equipment flared again, brighter, hotter, almost searing my skin. The hum deepened into a guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards, through my very bones. I wasn't just reading about sorrow. I was steeped in it, becoming part of the offering. What had the previous occupant tried to build in this workshop, amidst such profound suffering? And what did the entity want from me? My fault. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, colder than the room, colder than any fear I'd known. It consumed. It consumed me. My grief, my guilt, my every waking and sleeping moment of regret. It feasted on the raw, festering wounds of my past. A sudden, fierce surge of adrenaline coursed through me, a bitter antidote to the paralyzing fear. I had to leave now. There was no other option. This wasn't a place for solace. It was a slow, agonizing drain. I pushed myself off the floor, my muscles protesting with a dull ache. My breath hitched in my throat. The air in the study felt thick, heavy, pressing down on my chest as if the very walls were exhaling around me. I stumbled towards the door, my mind racing, scrambling for a plan. I didn't need much. A change of clothes, my wallet, phone, keys. The car was still outside. I could be in it, driving away within minutes. The thought was a lifeline, a desperate hope in the encroaching gloom. I snatched a small duffel bag from my bedroom closet, my hands fumbling with the zipper. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist, to watch. My skin prickled. It knew what I was trying to do. It knew I was trying to escape. The front door, a massive oak slab, loomed ahead. I reached for the heavy brass knob. My fingers clammy. I twisted. Nothing. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, putting my shoulder into it, grunting with effort. The door remained steadfast, unyielding. It was locked, bolted, immovable. I rattled the knob, a frantic, desperate clatter that echoed eerily through the silent house. Panic began to coil in my stomach, a tight, nauseating knot. I spun around, searching. The windows, they were old, many of them sealed shut with layers of paint and years of disuse. I rushed to the nearest one, a tall pane overlooking the overgrown garden. I clawed at the latch, pulling, pushing, desperate. It wouldn't budge. I tried another and another. Each attempt was met with the same stubborn resistance. The house was not just old, it was actively resisting me. It was holding me. A low groan emanated from somewhere deep within the walls, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bones. It wasn't the creaking of an old house settling. It was a living sound, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to mock my efforts. I had to find another way. There had to be an exit. The old house had countless rooms, a sprawling, illogical layout. I remembered seeing a door in the basement behind the main storage area that looked like it led outside. A service entrance, perhaps, or an old delivery chute. It was a long shot, but it was my only shot. The air grew damp, thick with the smell of earth and something metallic. At the bottom, a single bare bulb cast a weak, flickering glow over a cramped, dusty space. This wasn't just a basement. It was a workshop. Tools hung on pegboards, their outlines hazy in the gloom. A heavy workbench dominated one wall, cluttered with forgotten projects. And there in the far corner, nestled behind a stack of rusted pipes, was a heavy, steel-framed door. It looked like it opened to the outside. The air here was sharp with the tang of ozone and burnt metal, a strange counterpoint to the musty dampness. I could make out an arc welder, its mask propped carelessly beside it, and a grinder on the workbench. The room felt charged, like static electricity, but heavier, more malevolent. As I reached for the steel door, a sharp, blinding flash erupted from the arc welder. There was no one there. No one had touched it. The machine had come alive on its own, spitting light and heat into the frigid air. The smell of burning metal intensified, stinging my nostrils. The sparks danced, not just from the welder, but seemed to shimmer in the air itself, tiny pinpricks of light that appeared and vanished as if watching me. I recoiled, my hand flying back as if burned. The door, though just inches away, suddenly felt miles beyond my reach. The sparks continued, a relentless, terrifying display of raw, untamed energy. Then, with a groan that seemed to resonate directly inside my skull, the steel door shifted. A heavy clang echoed as a thick iron bar, previously unseen, dropped into place, locking it from the outside, or from within the wall itself. I stared aghast at the newly sealed exit. The house wasn't just old. It was an active, malevolent prison. I was trapped. The entity had shown its hand. It didn't just feed on me, it owned me. It had locked every door, sealed every window, made every escape route impossible. My shoulders slumped. My legs felt weak like rubber. I was utterly, irrevocably caught. What did it want from me now that it had me completely? My fault, it consumed. And I was the next meal. The thought ripped through me, sharp and sudden, but it also ignited something else, a desperate, furious resolve. I wouldn't just lie down and be devoured. I had to understand. I had to know what it was and why it was here in my house. The old estate was a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten spaces. My hands, still trembling slightly, ran over rough plaster and peeling wallpaper, searching for anything out of place. The library, filled with the ancestors' dusty tomes, offered no immediate answers, only more questions etched into the margins of ancient ledgers, names, dates, cryptic notations about the harvest and the tithe. My family. Always my family. I remembered the caretaker mentioning a service building, a place where the previous generations had tinkered and built. A workshop. It was located away from the main house, a small, squat structure half hidden by overgrown ivy and thorny bushes. My phone's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating tools hanging on pegboards like skeletal hands, benches cluttered with forgotten projects, and a heavy, industrial-sized welding machine squatting in the corner like a dormant beast. My breath plumed in the frigid air. I moved slowly, my boots crunching on scattered metal shavings and wood chips. The beam of my light danced across a wall, revealing a series of old photographs, faded and sepia-toned. They were portraits of stern-faced men and women, ancestors I vaguely recognized from the main house's gallery. But here, they were different. Their eyes, even in the poor light, seemed to hold a peculiar intensity, a shared knowing. Beneath the photographs, tucked away in a dusty cabinet, I found a series of locked journals. The locks were rusted, brittle. With a grunt of effort, I managed to pry one open, the metal snapping with a sharp crack that made me jump. The pages inside were yellowed, brittle, filled with spidery, looping script. The first few entries were mundane, detailing repairs and weather, but then the tone shifted. The burden grows heavier each year. The land demands its due. The youngest, a boy of 10, was taken by the fever. The old woman claims it is a sign, the bloodline thins. We offered the tithe, a terrible thing but necessary. The harvest was bountiful. My stomach churned. Tithe, harvest. What grotesque ritual were they referring to? I flipped through more pages, my fingers smudged with ancient ink. The entries became more frantic, less coherent. One entry, dated over a century ago, stood out, scrawled in a hand that seemed to tremble even on the page. He knows. The architect, he builds the cage, but he does not understand its purpose. The walls must be strong. The guilt must be deep. Only then can it truly feed. My vision blurred. My family had been architects for generations. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and me. We designed homes. We built structures. Had we been building prisons? I saw a glint of metal in the corner of my eye. On a workbench, half hidden beneath a canvas tarp, was a small, ornate silver locket. It wasn't like anything I'd seen in the house before. My fingers fumbled with its clasp. It opened to reveal two tiny, faded photographs. On one side, a young woman with kind eyes, vaguely familiar. On the other, a child. It was my mother and my sister. A new entry in the journal caught my eye, written in a different, more recent hand, one I recognized with a sickening lurch, my father's. Raj will be next. He carries the weight. He built the latest cage, strong and true. The sorrow will be deep. The guilt profound. He is the chosen vessel, the final offering. My breath hitched. The air in the workshop grew impossibly heavy, pressing down on me. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of metal sheets with a deafening clang. The sound echoed, bouncing off the high walls, seeming to mock me. Chosen vessel, final offering. It wasn't just a random haunting. It wasn't just a house built on bad luck. My family, my bloodline, had been complicit. They hadn't just suffered this entity, they had fed it, cultivated it. And my own grief, my crushing guilt over the fire, was not a burden to overcome but a carefully nurtured resource. The entity wasn't just feeding on my pain, it was waiting for it. It needed my specific brand of anguish, honed by the very architecture I designed, the very loss I endured. I was not just a victim, I was the culmination, the ultimate sacrifice prepared by generations of my own kin. I could almost hear the low hum of the dormant welding machine, waiting to fuse my fate. My family didn't just inherit this horror, they perpetuated it. They had made me, their guilt-ridden son, the final piece in their monstrous legacy. What terrible deeds had they committed that required such an endless, consuming hunger? And what exactly did the entity intend to do with its final, chosen offering? The clang of the metal sheet still vibrated in my teeth, a physical shockwave that seemed to clear the fog from my mind. Chosen vessel, final offering. The words not heard but somehow implanted had been the last straw. I had stumbled, yes, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, but now a strange, cold resolve settled over me. This wasn't just a haunting. This was a deliberate, predatory intent, and I was tired of being prey. I stood there, trembling not with fear but with a nascent fury. The air in the workshop with welding equipment, sparks in darkness, still felt thick, like breathing through wet wool, but I forced myself to take a deep, shaky breath. The metallic tang of rust and machine oil filled my lungs, grounding me. My gaze swept over the cluttered space past the hulking shapes of dormant machinery, the workbenches piled high with tools, the stacks of raw materials. This wasn't just a place of work. It was a repository of my family's past, a physical manifestation of their forgotten crafts. If there was a way to fight back, it had to be here, etched into the very fabric of this place, waiting for me to see it. I wasn't a detective nor a scholar of the occult, but I understood structure. I understood hidden spaces. I understood intent behind design. What if the house itself wasn't just a vessel for this thing, but a weapon against it? Or, worse, a trap designed by my own ancestors. I started moving, slowly at first, then with increasing purpose. The wood was old, scarred with countless cuts and scorches, imbued with the ghosts of labor. I pushed aside old blueprints, their edges brittle and yellowed, revealing faded sketches beneath. Most were for mundane repairs or simple furniture, but a few caught my eye. They depicted intricate interlocking mechanisms, strange bracing patterns, and unusual material choices for load-bearing walls. Not complex enough to be truly unusual, but different, like a language I almost understood but not quite. A shower of brilliant orange sparks erupted from a corner near a dormant welding station, showering the concrete floor before dying into faint tendrils of smoke. My breath hitched, a primal jolt of alarm, but then I realized it was just a loose connection, a final gasp from an old circuit. The brief, intense flare had, however, illuminated a small, almost imperceptible detail on the wall behind the welding equipment, a seam. My heart quickened, a different kind of beat this time, anticipation, not fear. I ran my fingers along the rough concrete. The seam was too straight, too precise to be natural cracking. It was a panel. Carefully, I pressed along its edges, feeling for any give. The cold metal against my fingertips sent a shiver up my arm. Nothing. I tried again, pushing harder, testing for a latch or a hidden button. My persistence paid off. With a soft click that was almost swallowed by the echoing quiet of the workshop, a section of the wall receded slightly, then swung inward. Dust, thick and ancient, puffed into the air, making me cough. Something dry and herbal, like forgotten potpourri. I fumbled for the flashlight on my belt, its beam cutting through the gloom. Inside, nestled on a small, cobweb-draped shelf, were several items. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages water-stained and warped. A collection of strange, intricately carved wooden talismans, smooth and cool to the touch. And most significantly, a rolled-up set of blueprints, tied with a thin, brittle leather cord. The journal fell open in my hands, revealing elegant, looping script. The blueprints unrolled with a crackle, their faded ink depicting not a house, but a complex, almost ritualistic structure. Not the house I knew, not exactly, but something deeply intertwined with it. There were symbols I didn't recognize, repeated patterns and strange annotations in the margins, written in the same archaic hand as the journal. One phrase, scribbled fiercely next to a detailed cross-section of the house's foundation, stood out: the binding must never break. My eyes scanned the blueprint, then the journal. The name of the original architect, a distant ancestor, was scrawled on the title page of the journal. He had designed the house. He had designed this, but designed it for what purpose? And what binding was he talking about? My fingers traced the faded ink of the journal. The original architect, my ancestor, had written with a meticulous hand, each loop and flourish hinting at a mind both brilliant and disturbingly precise. The blueprints spread beside it seemed to hum with a newfound, sinister energy, no longer just lines on paper but a map to something I was only beginning to comprehend. He had designed the house, yes, but not just as a dwelling. He had designed this, whatever this was, as a vessel. The binding he spoke of wasn't a structural element, I realized with a cold clarity that prickled my skin. It was a ritual, a sustained act of cruelty woven into the very fabric of the estate. His journal entries grew less architectural, more esoteric, detailing observations of the hunger, the feeding, and the perpetual sorrow. He wrote of grief as a conduit, guilt as an anchor. My own grief, my own guilt had drawn me here, hadn't it? Like a moth to a flame, a predator to its prey. I was not seeking solace. I was being harvested. A particular diagram in the blueprint caught my eye, a section labeled only with a cryptic symbol, tucked away in the deepest part of the house's foundation. It wasn't on any of the modern plans. This was a secret, an omission. The journal spoke of the crucible, a place where the essence is drawn. My ancestor, the architect, wasn't trying to bind the entity away. He was trying to bind it to the house to create a perpetual engine of despair. He was feeding it. And by bringing me here, by feeding on my own pain, I was completing his gruesome legacy. A tremor ran through me, not of fear, but of a fierce, unyielding resolve. I had been a pawn, a victim, but no longer. I would sever this connection. I would starve this thing. My hands, surprisingly steady, folded the blueprint. I knew where I had to go. The air grew heavier as I descended into the lower levels of the house. The usual chill became a biting cold, damp and smelling of rust and stale earth. Each step echoed, amplified by the low ceilings and rough stone walls. I could hear the house groaning around me, not with the familiar settling of old timber, but with a deeper, almost organic sound, like a living thing drawing a slow, labored breath. The scent of ozone began to prickle my nostrils, faint at first, then growing stronger as I navigated the labyrinthine passages. I pushed open a heavy, unadorned metal door, the hinges screaming in protest. The sudden flash of white-hot light nearly blinded me, momentarily etching the skeletal structure of tools and machinery onto my retinas. The air crackled, thick with the smell of burnt metal and something else, something acrid and sickly sweet like burnt sugar. A low, rhythmic clang echoed through the space, punctuated by the hiss of gas. A figure was hunched over a workbench, obscured by the sporadic bursts of light. The welding mask, momentarily lifted, revealed a face I almost recognized, a face etched with lines of profound weariness and something akin to a broken joy. It was the caretaker, the man who had given me the keys, his eyes now vacant, his skin sallow. He wasn't looking at me, but at the piece of twisted metal he was meticulously joining, a strange, abstract sculpture of barbed wire and rusted pipes. "You've come." His voice was a dry rasp, devoid of inflection. He didn't turn. "The architect always brings them here, to see the work." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What work?" I managed, my voice sounding thin in the echoing space. He lowered the mask, and another shower of sparks illuminated his silhouette. The clang of metal continued, steady, hypnotic. "The binding," he said, his voice muffled by the mask. "It needs reinforcement. They make the structure brittle." There was no one. Only the drone of the welding machine, the hiss of gas, and the rhythmic clang of his hammer. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to come from deep within his chest. "We who understand, we who are part of it now, we who feed it." He lifted his mask again, and his eyes, when they met mine, held no malice, only a profound, unsettling resignation. "I feel it, don't I, the hunger? It's growing stronger with I hear. Such rich sorrow I carry." He was a victim like me, but twisted, consumed. He was a part of the entity now, a willing or unwilling servant. The house wasn't just a place where the entity resided. It was an active participant, a mechanism designed to cultivate and capture despair. "I don't have to do this," I pleaded, stepping closer, the heat from his work radiating outwards. "I can fight it." He shook his head slowly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Fight what? My own reflection. It is within. It is without." The light illuminated the grotesque sculpture, revealing intricate details I hadn't noticed before. Tiny, almost imperceptible figures, writhing in agony, forged into the metal. It was a monument to suffering, a physical manifestation of the entity's harvest. My stomach churned. "What are you building?" I demanded, my voice sharper, cutting through the din. He pulled back the mask one last time, his eyes wide and unblinking. "A cage, Raj, for you, for all of us." Then he returned to his work, the light flaring, obscuring his face once more. The sound of the welding became deafening, consuming all other noise. The heat intensified, pressing in on me, suffocating. I stood there, rooted, watching the sparks fly, watching the caretaker, or what was left of him, continue his grim task. Was he truly trapped, or was there still a way out for him, for me, from this insidious binding? The workshop with welding equipment, sparks in darkness, pulsed with a terrible, vibrant energy. The light from the arc was a blinding, hungry eye, fixing me in its glare. I stood there, rooted, watching the sparks fly, watching the caretaker, or what was left of him. He wasn't entirely there, not anymore. Patches of his skin seemed to shimmer, dissolving into the air, revealing glimpses of raw, blackened wood beneath, as if the house itself was consuming and rebuilding him, piece by agonizing piece. His arm, the one holding the torch, was thick with rust and splintered timber, his breath a dry, rasping sound that the welding noise almost swallowed whole. It wasn't just the fire from the torch. It was the house's fever, an oppressive warmth that reeked of ozone and something else, something metallic and sweet like old blood. My shirt clung to my skin, damp and heavy. My eyes stung from the glare, even when I shielded them. He was working on a section of the far wall, a part that had seemed solid concrete moments before. Now, under the intense scrutiny of the welding arc, it looked less like concrete and more like a scab, a patchwork of different materials barely holding together. Then, with a final searing flash that bleached the world white, the arc extinguished. The sudden plunge into relative gloom was disorienting, leaving phantom afterimages dancing behind my eyelids. The workshop was silent save for the hiss of cooling metal and the low, guttural breathing of the caretaker. He lowered the torch, the corrupted arm moving with a stiff, unnatural jerk. He turned his head slowly, the features of his face, what remained of them unreadable in the dimness. His eyes, though, were twin points of an ancient, weary sorrow. He raised his free hand, pointing a gnarled, broken finger towards the section of wall he'd been working on. It was no longer a wall. A seam had opened, a narrow, vertical slit, edged with freshly welded, still glowing metal. He was a sentinel, a broken, unwilling gatekeeper. This was it. I took a deep breath, forcing the tremor from my limbs. No turning back, not now, not ever. I approached the opening, the metallic tang growing stronger, tasting like rust and distant thunder. I peered into the slit. It wasn't a door, not truly, more like a wound in the fabric of the building. No light, no discernible path. I pushed against the newly welded seam. It groaned, a sound like tortured metal, then swung inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow, descending passage. The air that rushed out was icy, carrying with it a new smell, sharp, acrid like ozone and burnt hair. My breath hitched. This was not a basement. The stone steps were uneven, slick with a glistening, viscous film that shimmered faintly in the scant light filtering from the workshop. The passage narrowed immediately, forcing me to turn sideways. The walls here weren't stone or concrete. It seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision, just beyond the reach of my gaze. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. My flashlight beam struggled to pierce the gloom, revealing only fragments of an immense, unnatural chamber. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. I could taste dust and something else, a dry, ancient bitterness that coated my tongue. The floor was uneven, a jumble of broken masonry, exposed earth, and something that crunched under my feet with a sound like dry bones. I swept the beam around, my heart accelerating. The walls of this chamber were not built, they were grown. They pulsed faintly, a low, rhythmic throb that I felt more in my bones than heard. Roots, impossibly thick and black, snaked across the surfaces, weaving in and out of exposed rock and what looked like petrified wood. It wasn't architectural in any sense I understood. They were not human faces, not truly. They were caricatures of grief, of agony, of despair, contorted into permanent, silent horror. And from this column, a low, resonant hum emanated, a vibration that resonated deep within my chest, a sound that felt both ancient and hungry. My flashlight beam found something else, something that made my breath catch in my throat. Embedded in the base of the central column, half obscured by the writhing roots, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It was open, revealing two faded photographs. My parents on their wedding day. Smiling, a wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just a part of the house, it was a part of me. The entity had consumed my family's memories, their essence, and woven it into its very being. This was the source. This was where it fed. My guilt, my grief, my family's legacy of pain, it was all here, fueling this monstrous growth. It knew me. It had always known me. My hands clenched around the wrench, gripped tight. The weight of it was no longer a comfort, but a weapon. A desperate, inadequate weapon. Could I truly destroy something that had consumed so much? Something that was now so intimately woven into the fabric of my own past? My hand hovered, calloused fingertips brushing the cold, pitted metal of the reinforced door. The sentinel, gaunt and still, was a statue carved from despair, its eyes, or what I perceived as eyes, fixed on some distant, internal horror. It didn't block my path, didn't move a muscle, but its presence was a suffocating weight, a silent plea. This wasn't a guard, it was a warning, a victim forever bound to this threshold. I could feel the reverberations of its torment, a dull ache in my own chest, mirroring the guilt that had brought me here. This house, this legacy, it was all a trap, and I, the architect of my own downfall, was finally stepping into its heart. I pushed the door inward. It didn't creak or groan, but swung with an eerie, almost frictionless silence, revealing a darkness so profound it felt like a physical absence of light, a void that swallowed the air itself. The sentinel remained, a fixed point of misery in the periphery of my vision, its silent agony a testament to whatever lay beyond. Was it watching me, or was it merely a shell its spirit long consumed? Stepping through the threshold, the air immediately thickened, heavy with the metallic tang of ozone and burnt earth. It was a cloying, suffocating smell that prickled the back of my throat, raw and industrial, utterly alien to the ancestral home's decaying grandeur. The sound was a sharp, hissing crackle, echoing off unseen walls. The flashes were sporadic, unpredictable, each one momentarily illuminating a chaotic tableau. Heavy-duty machinery draped in tarpaulins like sleeping giants, shelves laden with coils of wire and stacks of metal sheets, workbenches cluttered with tools. This wasn't just a physical space. It was a wound in the house, a gaping maw. This was it, the source. I could feel its tendrils, not just in the air, but burrowing into my mind, dredging up images of flickering flames, the desperate cries of my family, the searing heat of the house I designed collapsing around them. This space, this workshop, it was a focal point, not just for the entity, but for the house itself. The very bones of the structure felt different here, reinforced, almost designed to contain something or perhaps to facilitate its growth. The welding equipment, the raw materials, they weren't for maintenance. They were for construction or perhaps for destruction. Was it the house itself, resonating with the entity's power? Another flash, closer this time, revealed a massive, intricate metal cage built into the very foundation of the workshop, its bars thick, twisted, and scarred with the marks of furious, desperate welding. It wasn't empty. This wasn't a metaphor. This was a prison or perhaps a crucible. and the reveal hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The cage wasn't to keep something out. It was to keep something in, and it was failing. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its gaze, 1,000 needles of icy awareness piercing my thoughts. My children's laughter abruptly cut short, the acrid smell of smoke. My own hands drawing the blueprints, unknowingly sketching the precise conditions for their demise. The entity wasn't just feeding on my emotions, it was creating them, amplifying them, weaving a tapestry of despair designed to paralyze me. But through the haze, a sliver of my architect's logic remained. The cage, the welding equipment, the specific materials. This wasn't random. Someone had tried to contain it before, and that someone had understood the house, understood its structural weaknesses, its hidden strengths. The cage was a complex geometry, a web of specific angles and materials designed to disrupt, to contain. I could see the stress points, the fractures where the seal had been compromised. This wasn't a battle of strength, but a battle of design, of will. My breath hitched. My chest burned, my muscles screamed, but I forced my gaze past the terrifying projections, past the phantom flames, to the cage itself. There, amidst the twisted metal, I saw it. A series of intricate, almost invisible connections, like a circuit diagram etched in steel. Each connection was a point of weakness, a breach through which the entity was leaching out, growing stronger. And beside one of the workbenches, half hidden by a canvas, I saw a portable arc welder, its cables coiled, its mask resting on the cold metal. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. The entity, sensing my shift in focus, retaliated. The flashes of sparks intensified, becoming a continuous blinding barrage, each one accompanied by a crackle that felt like it was tearing at my eardrums. The air crackled with raw energy, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. The phantom voices grew louder, a chorus of accusation and despair, all echoing my own self-condemnation. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache behind my eyes. I understood. The previous architect, or perhaps an ancestor, had built this cage, not to destroy the entity but to seal it, to contain its malevolence within the house's very foundations. And the fire, my family's fire, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a consequence, a failure of the seal. The entity had gained enough power to breach its prison, to escape, to feed. And now I, Raj, the architect whose design had unknowingly provided the perfect fuel, was here to finish what another had started. Could I reforge the cage? Could I mend the breaches, using the very tools of its original confinement? The metallic tang of ozone still clawed at my throat, mingling with the bitter scent of scorched wood and something far fouler, something that reminded me of stagnant water and old grief. I lay sprawled on the cold concrete floor of the workshop with welding equipment, sparks in darkness, my chest heaving, each breath a painful rasp. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent drumbeat against my skull, and a warm stickiness bloomed behind my ear. I didn't dare touch it. The immediate visceral terror had receded, leaving behind a hollow ache, a profound exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. But it wasn't over, not really. The air still vibrated with a malevolent hum, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. One of the welding torches lay twisted and inert, its hose severed, a silent testament to the struggle. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for purchase on the rough concrete. I pushed myself up, groaning, every muscle screaming in protest. My vision swam, but I forced it to clear, scanning the devastation around me. Tools were scattered like discarded toys, shelves had toppled, spilling their contents across the floor in a metallic cascade. A stack of rusted girders lay askew, one end bent at an impossible angle as if struck by an invisible, colossal fist. This wasn't just chaos, it was violence. The workshop, this space I had instinctively known was crucial, felt like the eye of a storm. I staggered towards a workbench, using it to steady myself. My architect's eyes, even through the haze of pain and fatigue, began to catalog the damage, not just to the workshop, but to the house itself. The floor, once solid, now subtly sloped towards a central drain, as if the very ground beneath had buckled and warped. This was no ordinary damage. This was structural trauma, a wound inflicted upon the house's very skeleton, and it mirrored my own. It was like the house had screamed, tearing itself apart in agony. Then I saw it. Beneath the overturned workbench, half obscured by a pile of shattered ceramic tiles and a broken spirit level, was a small, ornate iron grate set into the concrete. It was unlike anything else in the utilitarian workshop, intricate and almost decorative, completely out of place. My breath hitched. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the searing pain in my side, and clawed at the debris. The grate was heavy, unyielding, but I could feel a faint, cool draft seeping from beneath it, carrying with it that same acrid, stagnant scent. It wasn't merely a cover for a drain. It was a lock, a seal. The design, though archaic, had a peculiar resonance, a subtle geometry that spoke of containment, of binding. This wasn't just a workshop. It was a crucible. The welding equipment, the reinforced walls, the very layout, it wasn't for building, it was for holding. The architect's mind, the one that had designed and built, now saw the sinister inverse, a design for entrapment. This grate, this anomaly, it felt like the key. I tugged at it, scraped my nails against the edges, desperate. It wouldn't budge. It was secured by a series of heavy bolts, sunk deep into the concrete. But one of them, I noticed, was slightly different. Newer, as if it had been replaced or tampered with. The air grew heavier, the distant hum of the house intensifying. The flickering sparks from the conduit seemed to dim, swallowed by a deeper encroaching gloom. I pressed my ear against the grate, listening. A faint, wet scraping sound came from beneath, followed by a low, guttural sigh that seemed to echo from an impossible depth. It wasn't the sound of a beast. It was the sound of something vast, something ancient, finally stirring in its prison. What had they been trying to keep down here, beneath the workshop, beneath the very heart of the house? I lay sprawled on the cold concrete floor of the workshop with welding equipment, sparks in darkness, my chest heaved, a raw, empty ache where my heart used to hammer. The air shimmered with the ghost of heat, a phantom warmth that contrasted sharply with the icy chill seeping into my bones. My eyes, still blurry, registered the faint, sporadic glow of cooling metal, tiny embers winking out in the gloom like distant dying stars. My body screamed. Every muscle, every joint protested the violence it had endured. The entity, whatever it truly was, had retreated, or perhaps it had been banished. I didn't know. Slowly, agonizingly, I pushed myself up, my limbs trembling like old timbers in a gale. Grit scraped against my palms. The concrete was unforgiving, rough against my bruised skin. I tasted blood, a coppery tang on my tongue, but couldn't tell if it was from a split lip or something deeper within my own ravaged mouth. My vision swam. I closed my eyes, willing the nausea away, letting the cold floor press against my forehead, a small, desperate anchor. What had I done? What had I truly accomplished? I had faced it. I had seen it for what it was, not just an external force, but a manifestation of generations of quiet, festering guilt, a monument built from the stones of my family's complicity and my own devastating grief. And I, in my own way, had fed it, nurtured it with every tortured memory, every pang of self-reproach. I staggered to my feet, leaning heavily against a workbench littered with rusted tools and discarded wire. Each breath was a shallow gasp, each step a careful negotiation with the pain. I needed to leave this place. This workshop, this place of creation and destruction, had been the crucible of my reckoning. But the real decision, the true resolution, lay elsewhere. It lay in the heart of the house, the place I had once thought would offer solace, only to find it a tomb. The walk back to the main house was a blur of aching muscles and a mind strangely clear. The house loomed not as a predatory beast, but as an ancient, wounded thing. Its porch sagged, a tired sigh. It was still formidable, still held its secrets close, but I saw it now without the veil of fear. I saw the weight of its history, the silent screams embedded in its very foundations. I pushed open the heavy front door. It groaned, a familiar, mournful sound that used to send shivers down my spine. Tonight it was just wood and hinges. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with dust and the lingering, almost imperceptible scent of decay, a scent I now recognized as the entity's breath. I moved through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. It was here that I had first felt its touch, its insidious pull. It was here that I had almost surrendered. I ran my hand over the dusty mantelpiece, the carved wood surprisingly smooth beneath my fingertips. The truth, the final, undeniable reveal, settled over me like a shroud. This house was not merely haunted, it was a vessel. A receptacle for the cumulative sorrow, the unspoken atrocities, the architectural designs that had led to the destruction of my own family. The entity was not an invader, it was a consequence. I could burn it down, erase it from existence, from the earth, from memory. I could walk away, sell the land, try to forget, but the thought brought no peace. My family's legacy, my own guilt, was not something I could simply incinerate. It was etched into me, a part of my own design. No, that wasn't the answer. I looked around the room, at the faded wallpaper, the splintered floorboards, the ghost of grand designs. I had designed houses that had brought joy and one that had brought unimaginable grief. This house, though, was different. It was a living testament to an enduring sorrow, a place where the veil between worlds felt impossibly thin. I had confronted the entity, yes, but I had also confronted myself. My responsibility, my complicity, my capacity for both destruction and perhaps reconstruction. A new purpose began to solidify, fragile but firm, within me. I wouldn't flee. I wouldn't destroy. I would understand. I would learn. I would study the architecture, the history, the materials, the very lineage of this malevolent dwelling. I would turn its secrets inside out, not to exploit them, but to finally, truly comprehend them. Perhaps in doing so, I could somehow, someway, neutralize its power, not through violence, but through radical transparency. I would become its keeper, its chronicler, its unwilling guardian. The house would not be a home, not for me, but it could be a warning. I felt a profound weariness, but beneath it a strange, quiet resolve. The scars would remain. The memories would never fade, but the gnawing guilt, the paralyzing fear had begun to recede, replaced by a grim determination. The entity was gone, or at least dormant. But what if it wasn't? What if it was merely waiting for the next architect, the next grieving soul, to walk through its doors?